If this doesn't chill you, nothing will." The growl started before the lights went out. Eli Mercer heard it from the sink while rinsing blood off his knuckles, and pretending the blood was only from barbed wire, only from fixing a fence, only from another small thing in a life made of small things he could still control. Outside the kitchen window, the storm had turned his property into strips of black mud and silver rain. The old barn beyond the pasture stood with one sagging shoulder toward the trees, dark except for the weak yellow bulb above the side door. Brutus, the German shepherd he'd rescued 2 winters earlier, stood in the back doorway with his entire body aimed at that barn. Not barking. Not whining. Growling. Low. Steady. From somewhere deep in his chest. Eli dried his hands on a rag and didn't look up right away. Enough. Brutus didn't move. That alone should have mattered. The dog obeyed voice faster than thought. Brutus had learned silence, hand signals, distance checks, perimeter loops. If the dog was ignoring him now, instinct had stepped over training. Thunder rolled hard enough to shake the window frame. Eli finally looked out. The shepherd stood rigid in the doorway, front legs locked, ears high, lips peeled just enough to show white teeth, amber eyes fixed on the barn like something inside it had personally insulted God. Rain blew across his back in cold sheets. He didn't even blink. Brutus. Nothing. Eli felt the old change happen before he wanted it. The quiet man living in the hills stepped back. The harder man, the one who survived by noticing what didn't fit, stepped forward. The slope behind the cabin dropped into cedar and fir. Beyond that lay a narrow wash where storm water ran after hard rain. Farther out, the ridge flattened into a broken stretch of ground Eli rarely crossed. Tonight, Brutus stared at it like a grave had split open. Eli stepped to the back door. The yard smelled like wet hay, cedar, diesel, and lightning. Beyond the pasture fence, the barn sat half swallowed by darkness. He had meant to tear it down last spring. Then summer got busy. Then the nightmares got worse. Then winter came. Brutus let out one short bark. Not fear. Warning. Eli followed the dog's line again. The side door of the barn stood half open. He had latched it earlier that morning. Now it moved with the wind. Just an inch. Then 2. Then still again. Probably the storm, Eli said, though he was no longer speaking to the dog so much as to the parts of himself that woke too fast in darkness. Brutus answered with a louder growl. Eli reached above the boot tray and took down the flashlight. Then, after a pause so brief it made him angrier than a longer one would have, he opened the drawer under the counter and took out the pistol too. He told himself it was because coyotes had been bold this year. He told himself that because it was easier than admitting the barn was making his hands remember Fallujah. The back steps were slick. Cold rain hit his face, sharp as pins. Brutus moved ahead at once, not running for the barn, just leading, looking back every few paces to make sure Eli kept coming. The dog knew better than to break formation when the air felt like this. That knowledge had not come from obedience school. It had come from the same bad places Eli had pulled him out of. Halfway across the yard, the barn light went out. Just dead. No pop. No flicker. 1 second a weak yellow bulb. The next, darkness. Brutus stopped so suddenly Eli nearly stepped into him. The dog's growl dropped lower. The wind pushed rain through the pasture grass. Somewhere far behind the house, a metal gate clanged twice. Eli swept the flashlight beam toward the barn. Weathered boards. Rusted roof panels. Sagging loft door. The open side entrance gaping black. No movement. Then Brutus swung his head sharply toward the loft window. Eli followed the motion and froze. Something had been there. Only for a beat. A shape withdrawing behind broken glass. Too tall for a deer. Too still for a hanging tarp. The kind of movement That was alarming precisely because it had tried not to be seen. The flashlight landed on empty dark. Brutus barked once, explosive and furious. Eli felt the first real pulse of adrenaline hit his chest. "Stay!" The shepherd did not stay. He surged 3 steps ahead, then stopped and looked back, ears forward, waiting with visible frustration. A flash of white cut across Eli's mind. Another dog, another dark opening, another order ignored, another man bleeding out because Eli had read 1 second too late. He shoved the memory down so hard it almost hurt. The mud deepened near the barn. Old tractor ruts had filled with black water. The smell changed too, less rain now, more rot, old straw, motor oil, mouse droppings, damp wood. And beneath that, something fresher. Metal. Brutus reached the side entrance and did not go in. That was new. He had nosed around that barn dozens of times hunting rats and field mice. But tonight, he planted himself outside the threshold and growled into the dark, as if entering without Eli would be stupid. Eli kept the flashlight low and approached on the hinged side of the doorway. "Brutus!" "Check!" The shepherd leaned forward, sniffed once, then backed up instead. That raised the hair on Eli's arms faster than any shadow could have. He angled the beam into the entry. Dust drifted through slanted rain blowing in from the roof gaps. An overturned wheelbarrow lay near the feed bins. A stack of old fence posts leaned against the wall. Tractor parts. Hay hooks. Coils of chain. Nothing moved. Then the beam crossed the dirt floor and caught something it shouldn't have. A boot print. Fresh. Half impressed in damp mud where rain had blown in under the door. Too big for his own. Too sharp-edged to be old. The tread ran inward toward the center aisle, then vanished where the ground turned dry. Brutus made a tight little sound in his throat and stepped closer to Eli's leg. That was worse than barking. He never crowded unless he wanted to guard. Eli crouched and touched the edge of the print with 2 fingers. Still wet. Whoever made it had come in after the storm started. His flashlight moved. Another print. Then another. One of them dragged at the heel. Someone was hurt. Or carrying weight. Or being careful because they knew enough to try hiding their pace. The beam climbed to the ladder leading to the loft. Muddy smears on the bottom 3 rungs. Not old. Eli straightened slowly. "Stay on me," he whispered. Brutus didn't need the instruction. The dog had already shifted into a tight orbit around Eli's left side, every few steps glancing toward the center aisle, then back toward the loft, then toward the far horse stall at the end of the barn. The stall door stood open. Eli did not remember leaving it open. Wind moved through cracks in the boards and made the hanging tack sway softly. Leather straps tapped against wood with tiny rhythmic knocks that sounded too much like someone impatiently drumming fingers in the dark. He swept the light left. Empty feed room. Right. Rusty plow blades. Ahead. The open stall. Brutus stopped again. Not at the loft this time. At the stall. His ears flattened. His body lowered. A growl rolled out of him so deep Eli felt it in his own ribs. "What is it?" Then he heard it. Breathing. Not the dog. Not his own. Slow. Uneven. From inside the stall. Eli's pulse changed. Every inch of him tightened, and suddenly the barn was no longer a collapsing farm building. It was a structure. Angles. Blind corners. Elevated positions. Sound traps. Exit points. The old maps in his head lit up exactly the way he hated. The storm cracked open with lightning so bright it turned the whole barn white for a single savage second. In that flash Eli saw the inside of the stall clearly. The empty water trough. The broken saddle rack. The hanging horse blanket. And behind the blanket, cast long against the back wall, a human shadow. Brutus exploded into barking. The blanket moved. Someone was in there. Eli brought the pistol up. "Show me your hands!" Silence. Rain hammered the tin roof. The dog barked again, then cut off all at once, and went dead still. Eli had seen that too. The blanket was moving, but the shadow on the wall wasn't matching it right. The storm flashed again. This time he saw why. There weren't two shapes in the stall. There were three. One behind the blanket. One slumped on the ground. And one much smaller shape crouched in the back corner, trying not to make a sound. Brutus growled so hard spittle flashed in the beam. Eli's finger tightened on the trigger. Then the smaller shadow lifted its head, and in a voice so thin it almost vanished beneath the rain, something inside the barn whispered, "Please don't let him wake up!" Then the shape behind the blanket started slowly standing up. The shape behind the blanket rose slowly, and for one impossible second Eli thought the whisper had belonged to it. Then lightning split the world again, and he saw the truth. The figure standing was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, one arm hanging wrong at the elbow, shirt dark with rain and something thicker than rain. His face stayed hidden behind the swinging horse blanket, but the silhouette was enough to tell Eli three things immediately. Injured. Armed. Still dangerous. Brutus planted himself between Eli and the stall and barked like he meant to tear the whole barn down with sound alone. "Hands!" Eli snapped. The man behind the blanket swayed once. Then a voice came out of the dark, rough and scraped raw. "Don't let the dog rush me." Not a threat. A warning. Eli's grip tightened on the pistol anyway. "Move the blanket." A wet cough answered him. The figure did not obey. From the corner of the stall, the smaller shape shifted. Eli cut the beam lower and found a child crouched against the backboards. A girl, maybe 8, maybe 9, with rain-dark hair plastered to one cheek and both knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes were huge in the flashlight glare. One of her hands was wrapped in the front of a filthy oversized sweatshirt, like she was trying to hide it. Not because she was cold. Because it was covered in blood. Brutus's bark stopped so suddenly it punched silence into the whole barn. The dog did not relax. He changed. His body stayed hard, but the sound vanished. Ears forward now. Eyes moving from the standing man to the girl and back again, calculating. Reading. Choosing. Eli felt the same shift happen in himself. This was no longer a possible trespasser in an old building. It was a scene. A sequence. Blood, positions, injuries, motives. He hated how fast his mind could still sort human fear into tactical categories. "Are you hurt?" he asked the girl. She looked not at him, but at the man behind the blanket. That told him more than any answer would have. The man saw it too, and slowly raised his good hand into view. Empty. No gun in it. But the wrist was slick with blood and dirt, and a strip of torn black fabric had been knotted tight above his forearm in a field-expedient tourniquet. Eli recognized the weave instantly. Tactical shell. The same kind he still wore when the weather got bad enough to make the old shoulder wound ache. Military, or pretending well. "Step out," Eli said. The man moved the blanket aside at last. Brutus growled again. He was younger than Eli expected. Mid-30s maybe. Beard overgrown. One cheek split open. Eyes gray and too alert for the amount of blood on him. He wore a black rain shell half cut away at the sleeve, dark cargo pants, boots caked in red mud. A holster rode empty on one hip. Across the front of his shirt, a deep spreading stain said whatever had hit him in the side had hit hard. Not random. Not clean. The smaller shape on the ground shifted then, and Eli's flashlight jerked down. The third body was not dead. A woman lay on the stall floor half on her side, hands tied in front, hair matted with mud and straw, one ankle caught in a cut length of blue nylon rope still fixed to the lower rail. Her chest rose shallowly. There was bruising around her throat. The girl made a tiny sound. The wounded man looked at Eli without blinking. "She needs help first." That should have been the moment Eli lowered the weapon. It wasn't, because the girl still hadn't come toward him, and the woman on the ground looked less like a mother protected by a good man than like someone who had recently fought both of them and lost. Brutus shifted one step to the right, opening his angle on the man's injured side. The dog had made a decision. Not attack. Containment. "Name," Eli said. The man hesitated. Too long. "Name," Eli repeated. "Caleb." It came too smoothly. Fake or practiced. The girl flinched at it. Tiny movement. But Eli saw it. So did Brutus. The dog's lips lifted just enough to show a line of white teeth. Eli changed targets without moving the gun. "What's yours?" The girl stared into the beam. Her mouth opened once. Closed. Then she whispered, "Mara." The man snapped, "Don't." Not loud, but sharp enough that both the girl and the dog reacted instantly. Mara recoiled. Brutus took one deliberate step forward, head low, eyes hard on Caleb's throat. Eli felt cold certainty settle into his chest. The girl was not afraid of him. She was afraid of the man answering for her. "Back away from her," Eli said. Caleb's face didn't change, but the muscles in his jaw did. "You don't understand what's out there." "Maybe. It isn't me." "Then back away from the kid." The woman on the floor stirred and tried to speak. Only air came out. Her bound hands dragged weakly against the straw. Mara lunged instinctively toward her, but Caleb moved first, one stumbling half step as if to block the girl from reaching the woman. Brutus exploded. The shepherd hit Caleb chest high and drove him back into the stall wall hard enough to shake the hanging tools outside. Eli surged forward, boots sliding in wet straw, pistol tracking low to high. Caleb's bad arm folded uselessly under him as he hit the boards. The girl screamed. The woman on the ground rolled, gasping. "Brutus! Hold!" The dog obeyed in the exact way Eli had trained him to years earlier. Teeth at the throat, weight on the chest, no tearing unless the man reached. Caleb froze under the pressure. "Listen to me." Eli kicked his good hand wide and found the knife there. Not a farm knife. A narrow black field blade half hidden up the sleeve. That ended the remaining doubt. Eli snatched it away and tossed it into the aisle. Mara had crawled to the woman now. "Mom," she whispered. The word hit Eli harder than the knife had. The woman's eyes opened to slits. Not confusion. Not relief. Raw, exhausted terror. She saw Eli with the gun, Brutus on Caleb, Mara kneeling in the straw, and for a second Eli could see her trying to decide which threat belonged to which man. Then she looked straight at him and rasped one sentence through a ruined throat. "He said he was saving us." The storm seemed to step closer to the barn after that. Eli crouched beside her and cut the rope at her ankle first, then the bind at her wrists. Deep ligature marks ringed both. Her hands shook violently when they came free. Mara tried to help, but the woman recoiled from Caleb so hard she hit the wall behind the feed bin. Brutus felt it and pressed harder. The dog had judged him right the first time. Caleb coughed blood onto the straw. "If I let them find us, she dies." The woman laughed once, a shredded sound. "You dragged us here. I kept you moving. You tied me up. You were screaming." Mara clamped both hands over her ears. Eli's flashlight beam slid over the far stall wall and caught something he hadn't noticed before in the adrenaline rush, a muddy rectangle propped behind the trough. He moved the light back. A military hard case. Black polymer. Steel corners. Yellow stencil nearly rubbed off by weather and handling. One line remained readable. property of U.S. Army. Eli felt the pulse in his neck change. Not because of the case alone. Because beside it, half hidden under a torn horse blanket, lay a second object. A radio unit. Not old ranch junk. Not civilian. Encrypted field comms. And clipped to the antenna cord was a laminated ID card smeared in mud and blood. Mara saw him looking and whispered, "Don't touch it." Eli ignored her. He kept the pistol trained on Caleb with one hand and stepped toward the case with the other. Brutus growled low, maintaining pressure. Caleb didn't fight him. He only watched Eli cross the stall with the look of a man seeing a clock reach the last minute. The ID card came free, sticky with rain and red dirt. Eli turned it toward the flashlight. The photograph was Caleb's. The name was not. SSG Owen Keller Recovery Detail. Blackridge Site Recovery Detail. Blackridge Site. And before Eli could decide whether that meant military rescue, black program, or something worse, the encrypted radio on the floor crackled to life by itself, and a calm male voice filled the barn. "Sergeant Keller, report." No one breathed. Then the voice said, with perfect clarity and a kind of patience that made the whole night colder, "If the ex-soldier is there, do not let him see the barn cellar." Eli's eyes dropped on instinct. There, under the straw and muddy hoof marks near Mara's knees, a thin rectangle of black ring was set into the floorboards, like a hidden hedge pull. Fresh scraped lines cut through the dirt around it. Someone had opened it recently. Someone had closed it fast. Mara saw where he was looking and went white. Caleb stopped fighting Brutus completely. And from somewhere beneath Eli's boots, something in the barn cellar hit the underside of the floor. Hard. The blow from beneath the barn floor hit hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Mara screamed and scrambled backward on hands and knees. The woman, her mother, grabbed her by the shoulders and dragged her away from the dark rectangle in the floorboards. Brutus snapped his head downward, barked once at the hidden hatch, then returned his teeth to Caleb Keller's throat without waiting for a second command. Eli froze for only half a heartbeat. Then training took over. He kicked straw clear of the black metal ring set into the floorboards and found the outline of a narrow trapdoor cut so cleanly into the barn planks it would have stayed invisible if the radio voice had not named it. Fresh scraped marks scored the wood. Mud had been smeared over the seams in a hurry. Whatever was under there had not been buried for years. The radio crackled again. "Sergeant Keller," the calm male voice said. "Confirm asset containment." No one answered. Eli kept his pistol on Caleb and lowered enough to snatch the radio with his free hand. "Who is this?" Silence answered first. Then the man on the radio said, "You're not helping anyone by opening that door." Brutus growled harder. The woman backed into the corner of the stall with Mara clutched against her. Her throat was bruised dark. Her wrists bled where the rope had bitten. But fear sharpened her eyes fast enough to cut through the shock. "Don't listen to him." Caleb spat blood into the straw. "For once you should." Eli didn't look away from the floor. "What's under there?" Nobody gave him a clean answer. The barn filled with rain, breathing, Brutus growling, and the sound of something below shifting once against wood and then going still, as if whatever was trapped in the cellar had heard human voices and was deciding whether hope was a mistake. Eli crouched lower and put the flashlight beam on the seam. One corner of the trapdoor sat a fraction higher than the others, warped recently by pressure from below. He asked again, "What's under there?" The woman answered first. "My son." That changed everything. Mara looked up at her mother, startled and wounded in the same breath. "You said he was gone." "I said they took him." Her voice broke on the last word. "I said that because I thought they'd already killed him." Caleb shut his eyes once, like the truth had finally become more exhausting than the lies. "They were coming back for him." Eli's head turned sharply. "Who?" The radio answered instead. Step away from the cellar door. The voice was closer now. Not physically. Intimately. Like someone who already knew the size of Eli's fear and was selecting the correct pressure point. You've already put yourself in the path of something you don't understand, the man continued. Take the woman and the girl and leave the barn. My team will recover the child. The word recover hit wrong. Property language. Eli had heard it before in rooms with no windows and fluorescent lights. Missing equipment. Lost intel. Sensitive material. Recover. Not children. Mara heard it too. Her fingers dug into her mother's sleeve. No! Brutus barked at the radio with fury. Caleb looked up at Eli from under the dog's weight. If they get in here before you open it, he disappears again. That word again landed like a nail. Eli kept the pistol steady. You dragged them here. I got them out. You tied her up. She was going back for him without a plan. The woman's face twisted. Because he was in the cellar. Caleb swallowed blood and rain. Because the road team was already on the county line. Mara jerked her head toward the barn wall. What road team? No one answered immediately. That was answer enough. Outside, an engine turned somewhere beyond the pasture. Not Eli's truck. Not close yet. But coming. Brutus heard it at the same time Eli did. The shepherd's ears flicked toward the barn doors, then back down to Keller's throat, then toward the trapdoor. The dog was making the same impossible calculation Eli was. Threat outside, life below, liar under his teeth. The radio crackled once more. Sergeant Keller, if you are unable to stabilize the scene, step away from the woman and girl and let the ex-soldier make his own mistake. Whoever was on the other end hadn't guessed. He knew. Mara saw the change in Eli's face. You were military? Were. Caleb gave a short laugh. Not to them. Eli ignored that. He moved to the trapdoor, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other, and set the radio down on the trough ledge without killing the channel. Brutus, he said. The dog looked at him instantly. Hold. Brutus pressed harder into Keller's chest, but did not bite deeper. Eli hooked 2 fingers through the trapdoor ring and pulled. Nothing. Swollen wood. Weight from below. Or a lock. He knelt, swept the beam along the edges, and found a narrow iron latch plate half hidden under straw. Fresh scrape marks there, too. Someone had opened this recently. Closed it fast. He flipped the latch. The whole barn seemed to lean in. Then a new sound came through the walls. Tires and mud. Closer. At least one vehicle had left the road and was moving up the property lane. The woman heard it and went white. No! Mara started shaking. He told them where we were. Caleb's face hardened. They were already coming. Brutus snarled at him anyway. Eli pulled the ring again. The trapdoor rose half an inch and stopped dead against weight from underneath. Then something below hit back. Not a loose shift. A deliberate slam. The wood jolted in Eli's hand. Mara cried out. Her mother pressed both hands over her mouth. Caleb looked at the floor with raw dread. Easy! Eli shouted toward the gap before he could stop himself. I'm opening it! Silence. Then a child's voice, faint and hoarse from the dark. Mom? The woman folded. She crawled toward the hatch. Micah! Baby, back away from it! A thin cough came from below. Then a dragging sound. Then the child again, weaker. They said you left. No, I'm here. The radio voice cut in over her. You are not helping him. Eli snapped toward it. Shut up. The answer came smooth as ever. Open that door fully, and everyone in this barn dies. Caleb's eyes went to Eli. He's not bluffing. Why? Caleb's throat worked once under the dog's teeth. Because there's no cellar under this barn. The sentence sat there. Eli stared at him. Then Caleb finished it. It's a shaft. The old boards under Eli's knees suddenly felt different. Not supported by packed ground. Hollow. He swung the flashlight back over the trapdoor and saw details his adrenaline had missed. Reinforced crossbeams under the planks, a hidden vent grate near the far stall, a streak of white chemical residue dried along one seam like disinfectant dragged up by moisture. Not a farm hiding place. An access point. To what? Micah, the woman whispered through shaking hands. Is anybody with you? A pause. Then, there's a lady. She won't wake up. Mara shut her eyes. Caleb looked away. Eli's pulse kicked harder. The engine outside cut off. Silence replaced it. No doors yet. No voices. Whoever had arrived knew enough not to announce themselves until they understood the layout. Brutus's growl changed. Lower. Wider. A perimeter warning now. Eli made the next decision fast. He stripped the pry bar off the barn post by the feed bins and jammed it under the trapdoor edge. Though it fought him. He levered harder. Old nails screamed. The radio voice sharpened for the first time. Do not do that. Eli put more force into the bar. The trapdoor jumped up 3 inches. Cold air burst out of the opening carrying bleach, wet concrete, and the stale breath of sealed underground space. Micah cried out from below. Eli shoved the flashlight into the gap. A steel ladder dropped straight down into white-painted concrete. At the bottom, maybe 15 feet down, a small landing sat under a flickering red emergency light. A boy in a filthy thermal shirt stood on the second rung from the top. Behind him, on the landing floor, a woman lay strapped into a chair tipped on its side, dark hair hiding most of her face. And beyond them, a corridor. White walls. Heavy steel door. Camera dome. Built. Micah squinted up into the light. He couldn't have been older than 6. Mom? The woman beside Mara made a sound that nearly broke the barn apart. Then a hard metallic clang rolled up from somewhere deeper in the corridor below, followed by another, then another, like doors unlocking one after another under the earth. Caleb went pale under the dog. Eli saw it, and knew whatever was down there had just changed. He lowered the pistol 1 inch, and looked straight at Keller. What did I open? Caleb answered without blinking. The wrong level first. And from somewhere down the white corridor, under the barn, footsteps started running toward the shaft. The running footsteps below the barn came fast enough to strip all the air out of the stall. Not one set. Several. Hammering up the white corridor beneath the trapdoor in panic bursts, then breaking apart, then coming together again as if different people were running for the same point, and none of them trusted what waited when they got there. Micah heard them too. The little boy on the ladder froze halfway between the landing and the hatch and looked back over his shoulder into the red-lit corridor below. Mom? The woman in the straw made a sound Eli felt in his teeth. She dropped to the edge of the opening, one hand gripping the ladder rail so hard the knuckles went white. Micah, climb! Now! The boy didn't move. A child's instinct had collided with fear. He wanted his mother. He wanted to obey. He wanted to see what was chasing the footsteps. And in that half-second of indecision, whatever was down there got closer. Caleb shoved against Brutus's weight just enough to speak. Pull him out! Eli ignored the command in the words, but not the truth inside them. He lowered himself to one knee beside the opening, reached down through the hatch, and extended his free hand toward the boy. Micah! Eyes on me! Micah looked up. Rain whispered through the broken roof slats overhead. The flashlight beam shook once across the child's thin face and showed what the red landing light had hidden. A bruise under one eye, chapped lips, the collar of the thermal shirt crusted with old dirt. He had been down there longer than a night. "Take my hand," Eli said. Micah lifted one hand from the ladder. Then the corridor lights below changed. The red emergency glow cut out. Flat white strips came on at ankle height along the corridor, harsh and clinical, drawing a path straight toward the shaft. It was the kind of light Eli knew instantly. Not safety lighting, not power restoration. Guidance. Funnel light. Telling movement where to go. Caleb saw it and went still. "No!" The radio on the trough crackled. A woman's voice this time. Young. Controlled. Emotionless in a way that felt practiced rather than natural. "Upper access breach confirmed. Realign juvenile subjects. Seal lateral archives. Recovery team to barn shaft 1. The woman in the straw recoiled from the opening. Mara covered both ears. Micah's face emptied. Caleb shut his eyes once. Too late. Eli looked down sharply. "Who was that?" No one answered quickly enough. Because the first person burst into view in the lower corridor. A woman in a gray institutional shirt, barefoot, hair hacked short at the jaw, running hard enough to slip in the water she was kicking up. She never even saw the boy on the ladder. Her eyes were fixed on the shaft above, on the square of night, on the possibility of getting out. Behind her came a second figure. Then a third. Men. Women. One dragging something at the ankle. All of them gaunt. All of them moving with the same blind speed of people who had stopped caring what happened if they could just reach one open door. The mother beside Eli made a broken sound. "Oh God!" Mara whispered. "They opened the wrong hall." Then automatic fire tore the corridor apart. Not from men Eli could see. From low black slits hidden in the wall. The first runner folded instantly. The second hit the floor and tried to crawl. The third got 2 more steps before the sweep cut across his legs and spun him sideways into the concrete. The white floor lights turned every splash dark. Micah screamed. Eli grabbed the boy's wrist and hauled him upward 3 rungs in one violent pull. Micah slammed into the underside of the hatch lip, coughed, scrambled, and then Eli got both hands under his shoulders and dragged him into the stall. The mother caught the boy the second he cleared the opening and crushed him to her chest. Mara threw herself into both of them. For one impossible second, in the middle of gunfire and rain and Brutus growling over Caleb's throat, it almost looked like safety. Then Brutus snapped his head toward the barn doors and barked once, short, savage, immediate. Eli looked up. A shadow moved across the gap beneath the main sliding door. Then another. Boots in the mud outside. Voices too low to make out. Multiple. The surface team had reached the barn. Caleb heard it, and said the one thing Eli least wanted to hear. "They're here for the shaft, not us." Eli turned the pistol on him, so fast the motion hurt his shoulder. "Difference?" Caleb didn't blink. "If they secure the shaft, we become whatever they can't move." The woman with the children looked up sharply. "Rachel," Caleb said to her, voice dropping. "Listen to me." So that was her name. Rachel did not answer. She had both arms around Micah and Mara now, as if her body alone could make up for all the time the underground had stolen. A loud metallic impact shook the barn doors. Once. Then again. Not fists. A ram. Eli's mind split the problem instantly. 3 civilians in the stall. 1 injured operative under a dog. A shaft below full of unknown numbers. Multiple hostiles at the barn doors. No clean exits. He made the only choice that kept options alive. Brutus. Guard. The dog looked at him instantly. Door. Brutus backed off Caleb without taking his eyes off him, spun, and moved into the center aisle between the stall and the main sliding doors. Ears high. Head low. Teeth bared. A line drawn in fur. Caleb rose partway, holding his bleeding side. Eli kept the pistol on him. "You move wrong, he finishes it." Caleb nodded once. Not because he accepted the threat. Because he had already measured the dog and found the math convincing. The ram hit the barn door again. The crossbar bent. White flashlight beams stabbed through the gaps. The radio crackled with the same calm male voice as before. "Ex-soldier, this is your final warning. Step away from barn shaft 1. Eli snatched the radio and spoke into it. "You people have a habit of showing up where kids are bleeding." Silence. Then the man answered, almost pleasantly. "And you have a habit of opening sealed sites before understanding their hierarchy." Eli's eyes dropped to the shaft. "What is this place?" "A continuity archive." Caleb let out a short, ugly laugh. "That's their clean phrase." Eli had no time to ask more. Because the strapped woman on the landing below moved. Not much. Just enough. A twitch through one shoulder. Then another through the neck, as if whatever sedation held her had finally lost the fight against noise, light, and chaos. Eli's flashlight slid back down the shaft involuntarily. The corridor below had gone quieter now, but not safe quiet. Terrible quiet. The kind left behind after violence had done exactly what it meant to do. 2 bodies lay in the white strips. One still moved weakly. The wall slits had gone dark again. Waiting for the next alignment. The woman in the chair lifted her head. Hair hung across most of her face. One wrist was strapped to the metal armrest. A medical line ran from her elbow to a half-empty bag clipped to the chair frame. Her mouth moved once without sound. Micah saw her and pressed deeper into Rachel. "That's the sleeping lady." Rachel's voice came out almost non-existent. "Who is she?" Caleb stared down the shaft too long before answering. "That depends on who's asking." The barn door shuddered under a fourth impact. One hinge screamed. Brutus barked and launched forward half a step, then stopped exactly where Eli had told him to stop. The next blow punched the sliding door inward enough to let a hand reach through. The dog hit the gap like a bullet. A scream tore across the barn. The hand vanished. The ram dropped outside. Men shouted for angle and fallback. Brutus came off the door snarling with blood on his teeth and planted himself there again, daring the world to try a 5th strike. That bought Eli seconds. He used them on the woman below. "Hey!" he shouted down the shaft. "Can you hear me?" The woman's head lifted another inch. Hair slid from one eye. Eli's whole body locked. Not because he knew her immediately. Because he almost did. The shape of the eye. The scar through the left eyebrow. The line of the cheek. Memory rose before certainty, the way it does when grief reaches up from years ago and says wait. She blinked hard against the light. Then the recognition hit him all at once. A hospital corridor. A folded flag. A phone call he had listened to without believing. A house fire 3 months after the casualty notice. A body never recovered from the wreck that supposedly took his last family with it. His sister, Hannah Mercer, dead for 11 years. Brutus stopped growling. Even he knew. The woman in the chair looked up into the shaft, into the flashlight, into the rain beyond the hatch, and in a voice so ruined Eli almost missed it, she whispered one word that made the whole barn tilt under him. "Eli?" The word hit Eli like a bullet he had been walking toward his whole life. "Dad?" It came from somewhere below the white corridor, small and uncertain and heartbreakingly familiar in the way impossible things sometimes are before your mind catches up with them. Rachel folded over the trough, with both hands over her mouth. Mara stared at Eli with something close to pity. Caleb Keller stopped struggling under Brutus entirely. Eli looked down through the narrow shaft opening, through the hard white emergency light, past Hannah crouched under the live panel, toward the dark end of the corridor where the voice had come from. "Say nothing," Caleb said. Eli ignored him. "Who's down there?" No answer. Then a smaller voice, tighter now with fear. "Mom?" Rachel broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. She just made one ruined sound and sagged against the trough, like every muscle had finally admitted what her face had been hiding since the panel had named him. Micah grabbed her sleeve. Mara took one fast step toward the shaft. Brutus swung his head from the bent door to Eli, reading the whole room the way only the dog ever seemed able to. Hannah looked up from below and saw the answer on Eli's face before he spoke. "No," she whispered. "No, not him too." The radio crackled alive. The calm male voice was gone now. The younger female one had replaced it. "Barn team, confirm paternal contact." Nobody moved. The voice continued, perfectly composed. "If verbal recognition has occurred, do not escalate surface breach until transfer timing is restored." Eli's grip tightened on the folder hard enough to bend the waterproof sleeve. "Who are you?" Then, "Dr. Mara Vale, Archive Continuity." Mara flinched like she'd been struck. Eli snapped his eyes to her. "That's your name." The girl didn't answer. Rachel did. "No," she said, barely audible. "That's what they wanted it to be." The whole barn shifted under Eli. He looked from Mara to the radio to the shaft below and understood that the voice on the speaker and the girl standing in his barn were connected by something worse than coincidence. Training. Replacement. Maybe inheritance turned into design. Below them, Hannah pushed herself up the wall and shouted toward the dark corridor. "Stay back!" A small figure moved into the edge of the white light. Boy. Maybe 7. Barefoot. Gray institutional shirt hanging off one shoulder. Thin face. Hollow cheeks. 2 alert eyes. He didn't run toward the ladder. He stopped just at the edge of the illuminated floor strip and looked up through the shaft into the rain. Into Eli. The boy below tilted his head slightly, trying to see around the glare. "You came." Eli felt every living thing in the barn waiting for him to answer. "What's your name?" he asked. The child swallowed. "Jonah." That was answer enough. Eli's knees nearly unlocked under him. He forced them not to. Jonah stood in the corridor with one hand pressed to the wall, like he was dizzy or drugged or simply too exhausted to trust his own legs. A black band circled one wrist. There was dried blood under 2 fingers. He looked not like Eli had looked as a boy, but like what might have been left if someone had tried to file a child down until only compliance remained. Brutus barked once at the shaft, then turned and barked twice at the barn doors. The outside team had started moving again. A cutting wheel screamed against the track. Orange sparks sprayed through the gap. Caleb looked up from the straw. "They know he's there now." Eli swung the pistol toward him. "And you knew before I did." Caleb met his stare with the bleak honesty of a man finally too cornered to shape the truth. "I knew there was a paternal note under Mercer. I didn't know it was you." Rachel rounded on him. "You brought us to him. I brought you to an unsealed access point. You brought us to his barn. Because every other route was already burned." Micah started crying in earnest now. Mara pulled him against her side and kept staring at the shaft like if she looked away, Jonah would disappear back into the corridor and become a rumor again. Below, Hannah's voice sharpened. "Jonah, come here." He didn't move. The little boy kept looking up at Eli as if something buried in him had already decided and only needed the adults to catch up. "She said you were dead," he said. Eli looked at her. "How long?" She shook her head once. Not refusal. Collapse. "I thought they moved him out years ago." "That's not what I asked." Tears mixed with rainwater still dripping from her hair. 7 years. 7 years. Long enough to turn a son into an archive branch. long enough to make a mother look at a panel before she looked at a face. Long enough for a sister to learn another sister's name was being used by someone else. The cutting wheel outside bit deeper. The main barn door track shrieked. The radio voice returned. "Jonah, step back from the lane." He didn't. "Jonah," the voice repeated, firmer now. "Return to your room." That made the child finally react, but not the way the voice wanted. He stepped forward instead. Just one pace. Enough for the light to catch the left side of his face clearly. A scar. Short. Pale. Under the eyebrow. Same place Eli had his. Eli could not seem to get enough air. The female voice on the radio stayed calm, but the calm had gone thinner. "Lower team, secure juvenile Branch Mercer immediately." The phrase detonated through the barn. Jonah heard it too. His eyes widened. He looked to Hannah first, then to the dark behind him, then up at Eli. That one sequence told Eli everything he needed to know. The boy was not staying in that corridor because he didn't want to leave. He was staying because he was afraid of what was behind him. "Jonah," Eli said, voice low and steady now in the way it had once gone steady under gunfire. "Come to the ladder." The child took one step. A shape moved in the darkness behind him. Tall. Black-clad. Fast. Hannah screamed, "Run!" Jonah spun. Too late. The figure hit the edge of the light, and Eli saw a visor, a shock baton, one gloved hand reaching. He fired instantly. The shot cracked through the shaft and blew sparks off the corridor wall inches from the operator's head. Not a clean hit, but enough. The man ducked, and the baton smashed the wall instead of Jonah's shoulder. The child ran. Hannah surged off the wall and caught him halfway to the ladder. The impact took both of them to the floor. The operator came again. Brutus exploded into barking so violent it drowned the storm. Eli dropped flat to get a cleaner angle through the half-sealed hatch, but the opening was too tight, and the risk was too high. Hannah and Jonah were tangled together. One wrong shot, and the barn doors gave way. The entire left panel slammed inward with a crash of wood and bit track. Rain and white beams flooded the aisle. 3 armed men in black with their gear surged through the gap in disciplined spacing. Brutus hit the first one in mid-step. The man went down screaming. The second operator fired reflexively, not at Eli, at the dog. The shot cracked through the barn, so close Eli felt the air tear. Brutus yelped. Everything in Eli went white. He pivoted and fired twice into the doorway. One operator dropped behind the feed bins. The second lost his angle and slammed into the broken panel. Caleb surged up from the straw in the same second, one hand going for the fallen Blackfield knife Eli had thrown earlier. Mara saw it first. "Eli!" Too late. Caleb came off the floor with the knife in his good hand, not at Rachel, not at the children, but at the radio on the trough. He drove the blade down through it hard enough to shatter the casing and pin the speaker dead against the wood. Then he turned and shoved the entire hard case off the trough into Eli's chest. "Take the files and go." The third man through the door shot him in the side. Caleb folded like a cut rope. Rachel screamed. Micah screamed louder. Mara dragged him down behind the overturned wheelbarrow. Brutus, limping now and half mad with pain, launched past Eli into the doorway again and vanished in a collision of bodies, rain, and snarling. Below the hatch, Hannah had Jonah in both arms and was dragging him toward the ladder while the lower operator recovered from Eli's shot. Eli looked at the case in his arms, at Caleb bleeding into the straw, at the broken barn door, at Rachel reaching for a son below and a daughter beside her, and understood the failure all at once. He could save the files. He could save the children. He could save the dog. He could maybe save Caleb. Not all of them. And the second he understood it, the live panel below the shaft changed again. Transfer route lost, emergency purge available. Hannah saw it and went dead pale. Eli, she shouted up through the chaos. If that level purges before Jonah reaches the ladder, I lose him again. Emergency purge available. The words on the live panel turned every living face in the barn toward the shaft. Rachel stopped breathing. Mara gripped Micah so hard he whimpered. Caleb Keller, bleeding into the straw, laughed once through his teeth like a man hearing an old prophecy arrive exactly on time. Below, Hannah shoved Jonah behind a tip chair and looked up through the half-open hatch at Eli with command cutting through the drugs in her blood. If that line goes red, they flood the lower hull. Eli stared down at her. How long? Hannah looked at the blinking panel and did math with the face of someone who had done it before. Not long enough. Outside, boots slammed through mud. The barn door shuddered under a fresh hit. Brutus's snarling had changed from attack to pure defensive rage, the kind he only used when pain had become irrelevant. The dog was still in the doorway, still holding the breech, but Eli could hear strain in every bark now. Rachel grabbed Eli's sleeve. Get Jonah first, Caleb rasped. Take the files too. Eli rounded on him. I'm not carrying paper while kids drown. You don't carry the files, Caleb said. They carry you. The sentence nearly lost itself under the crash of the barn doors. One of the outer panels finally tore free and slammed inward. Rain and white flashlight beams flooded the aisle. Brutus hit the opening like a bullet and dropped the first man through with a scream. The second operator fired wide to avoid the dog, and the round shredded a hanging feed sack instead of fur. Grain burst through the beam like sand. Eli fired twice over Brutus's back and drove both men low. Rachel, he snapped, get the kids behind the trough. She didn't move. Not because she was refusing. Because she was staring at the open file case on the wood beside her. The top folder had slipped farther out during the fighting. A corner of a biometric card showed beneath a clear sleeve. She looked at it like it had already killed someone. Eli saw that and knew. He kicked the case toward her. What am I looking at? Rachel knelt, one arm still around Micah, the other hand shaking as she pulled the sleeve free. Mara tried to read over her shoulder. Rachel blocked her instantly. Don't, she whispered. Mara's voice cracked. You already know. Below the hatch, the lower panel tone changed. One clean bell. Then another. The white letters flickered. Emergency purge available. Confirmed pathway. Barn shaft 1A. Second line began counting down beneath it. Level reset iron. 2 o'clock. Hannah saw it first. Eli! He dropped to the opening. Jonah was clutching the ladder rail now, too frightened to move without direction. Hannah had one hand on him, and the other braced against the tip chair to keep herself from collapsing. Behind them, the white corridor was changing again. The floor strips that had been steady now pulsed slowly toward the shaft like a path being drawn for something that had not arrived yet. What do I do? Eli asked. Hannah's answer came instantly. Pull him up. Then come for me. Caleb heard that and barked out. No. Rachel shot him a look full of murder. Shut up. He can't come back down if the lane locks, Caleb said. Once the first juvenile clears, the shaft repurposes. Eli stared. Repurposes to what? No one answered. Because the radio voice did. Collection. The female voice was closer now, no longer coming from the smashed speaker alone. It bled faintly through the shaft vents, through the barn walls, through hidden systems in the floor itself. Barn team, she said. Do not damage subject Mercer male. The level is converging exactly as designed. Mara went dead still. Eli looked at her. You know that voice. For a second, she looked like a child again. Then she hardened. She used my name. that landed harder than Eli expected. Rachel finally pulled the top biometric card fully free. It slid from the sleeve and landed face up in the trough light. A hospital photograph. A newborn under a clear blanket. A line of typed text. Branch Juvenile. Jonah Mercer Paternal Baseline. Mercer, Eli Maternal Host. Rachel Dawson. Eli's stomach turned over. Rachel shut her eyes. Micah looked from the card to Eli. "Why does it say your name?" No one answered him. Mara did not look surprised. That frightened Eli too. "How long did you know?" he asked Rachel. She opened her eyes and gave him the most exhausted truth he had ever seen. "Since the day they took him away." Another crash at the barn doors. Brutus barking. A man screaming. The storm driving sideways through the gap. Eli forced himself back to the shaft. Jonah was looking up now, eyes huge, waiting for a fatherhood Eli had not even known to grieve. "Jonah! Climb!" The boy didn't move. "Come on!" Jonah swallowed. "Will they take her?" He meant Hannah. Eli's heart gave one ugly twist. "Not if I can help it." That still wasn't enough. Hannah looked at her son, then up at Eli. "Tell him something true." He almost laughed at the cruelty of that request. What truth did he have left? Then Brutus yelped at the doorway. Real pain this time. Eli felt it like an electrical hit. He turned and saw the dog staggering backward from the broken door, one rear leg not taking weight. Blood darkened the fur above the hock. The operator he had dropped first was up again and dragging a compact launcher through the mud. The man was not aiming at Eli. He was aiming at the floor. At the shaft. Caleb saw it too and shouted, "Down!" The canister launched through the doorway and clanged off the stall rail. Eli threw himself sideways, catching Micah and Mara under one arm and Rachel by the shoulder. The canister burst in a white cloud so cold it seemed to burn. Gas. Not smoke. Not tear agent. Something denser. It rolled low instantly, seeking the floor, the trapdoor, the shaft. Brutus coughed and snarled through it. Rachel wrapped both kids against her and buried their faces in her soaked shirt. Caleb dragged himself by one elbow toward the canister with a look Eli did not understand until he saw the black marking on the side through the vapor. Sedative transfer compound. "Oh God!" Hannah whispered from below. The gas was not for killing. It was for live capture. Eli kicked the canister back toward the doors. The white cloud billowed wider, buying them half a second of visual cover. He used it. He lunged to the shaft, dropped flat, and seized Jonah by the wrist. The boy came up fast, too light, knees scraping the ladder rungs as Eli hauled him through the opening and into the barn. Jonah hit the boards hard and immediately twisted back toward the shaft. "Mom!" Hannah forced herself to the ladder at last. The second her hands hit the lowest rung, the corridor behind her lit full white. Not the floor strips. Overhead banks. Clinical. Brutal. Final. The radio voice came warm with satisfaction. Node confirmed. Every system on the lower level seemed to wake at once. Doors farther down the hall began unlocking in sequence. Hydraulics thudded. The wall gun slits reopened. And behind Hannah, beyond the tip chair, shapes started moving in the glare. Children. Not one. Many. Some older. Some very small. All wearing the same gray institutional shirts. They were being herded toward the shaft. Rachel saw them and forgot her own breathing. "No!" Mara took one step toward the opening, as if magnetized by the sight. Caleb looked at Eli with raw disbelief. "Now do you understand why the files matter?" Eli didn't answer, because one of the children in the corridor stopped under the white light and lifted her face fully. A girl about Mara's age. Same jaw. Same eyes. Same mouth line. Not resemblance. Replication? Mara saw her too. For the first time all night, the girl in Eli's barn looked truly terrified. The child below stared up through the shaft, through the gas and rain and flashlight glare, straight at Mara, and whispered the one sentence that cracked the whole scene open. "They told me I was the spare." The sentence hit Eli harder than the gas. Rachel made a broken sound. Hannah froze on the ladder. Even Caleb went still enough for Brutus to stop growling and simply stare. Mara looked at the girl below like she was seeing a mirror built out of somebody else's childhood. "No," she whispered. The child in the corridor didn't look confused. She looked resigned, like this meeting had been explained to her long before she was old enough to understand it. More children gathered behind her in the white hall. The radio voice returned, softer now, almost intimate. "Barn team, preserve Mercer male and both viable juvenile variants." Variants. Not daughters. Not children. Variants. Rachel dropped to her knees in the gas and mud, one arm around Jonah, the other around Micah, and finally said the truth. "They didn't just take your son, Eli. They built backups." She was one of them. The sentence hit Eli like cold iron in the lungs. They built backups. For one suspended second, the entire barn seemed to lean around it. Rain drummed through the broken roof. Gas rolled white over the floorboards. Brutus stood in the doorway on 3 good legs, snarling into headlights and muzzle flashes. Below the half-open shaft, a corridor full of children in identical gray institutional shirts waited under clinical light, while one girl, Mara's face repeated at a younger age, stood looking up as if she had been trained for this exact moment. Mara backed away from the opening. Not much. Just one step. But Eli saw it. Rachel saw it. Hannah froze on the ladder, and saw it most of all. The girl below lifted one hand toward the shaft. "They said if the first line failed," she whispered, "I was next." Mara shook her head hard enough to throw rain from her hair. "No," the radio voice answered her with awful calm. "Variant 8 remains compliant. Preserve her if feasible." Variant 8. Not daughter. Not child. Spare. Rachel folded over Jonah and Micah at once, dragging both boys tighter into her body, as if the only rebellion she still trusted was physical possession. Caleb Keller, pale with blood loss and transfer compound rolling around him, looked from the shaft to Mara with the expression of a man seeing the architecture finally show its ugliest wall. Eli felt the whole shape of the night change again. This was no longer only about hidden corridors, stolen family, or a dead sister found alive. This was replication. Branches. Children made into contingencies. The lower panel flickered and updated beneath the white text. Node confirmed transfer collection ion. 121. Hannah saw it and shouted up through the shaft. "Eli, if that clock hits 0, they flood barn 1 with sedative and route everybody on this level to the lift." Eli looked down sharply. "Everybody?" Hannah's laugh was short and broken. "Everyone whose blood is worth cataloging." The outer team chose that exact second to push the breach. The broken barn doors blew inward under a coordinated shove, and 3 black-clad operators came through low and fast, masks on, rifles tucked tight, not spraying rounds now, but moving like men entering a recovery scene they had rehearsed. Brutus hit the first at knee height and spun him into the feed bins. Eli shot the second through the shoulder before he found his angle. The third operator ducked hard, came up on the other side of the wheelbarrow, and fired a dart into Caleb's chest. Caleb jerked like someone had yanked a cable inside him. "Down!" Eli shouted. Rachel flattened the boys beneath her. Mara dropped beside them on instinct. Eli fired again and shattered the operator's visor. He went over backward through the doorway into the rain. Brutus came off the first man with blood on his muzzle and a worse limp in his rear leg, but he was still moving, still choosing the line between the opening and the family behind him. Caleb hit the floorboards face first. The dart protruded from the meat high in his chest, just below the collarbone. Not a kill shot. A live capture dose. He clawed for the shaft edge anyway. "Eli!" he gasped. "The files!" Eli almost laughed from rage. "To hell with the files!" Caleb coughed blood. "The files tell you which one isn't in your line." That landed. Eli turned toward the open case without meaning to. Rachel saw it and went pale. "Don't!" Below the shaft, the younger Mara, the spare, the variant, whatever sick name the archive had used, had moved closer to the ladder. She was no longer alone. 2 more children hovered behind her, one older boy with a shaved head and a smaller girl holding a torn blanket. All of them were staring up at the opening like trapped things that had just smelled wither. The live panel changed again. Parental node stable juvenile variants present collection priority escalated. Mara saw her own face repeated below and finally broke. Not screaming. Not crying. She just went still in the terrible way people do when some private theory of themselves dies all at once. Rachel reached for her. Mara flinched away, then hated herself for it immediately. Micah whispered, "Why does she look like you?" No one answered. Because Jonah saw the girl below too, and said the thing no one else had the courage left to form. "She's not my sister." The radio voice cut back in, closer now, almost pleased. "Correct. Shared maternal architecture does not ensure branch equivalence." Rachel made a sound that turned into a sob and a curse at the same time. Hannah climbed 2 more rungs and then stopped, gritting through pain as the lower hall filled with more movement. Children. Women. One barefoot man dragging an 4-pole he had apparently refused to leave behind. All of them gathering because the level had learned where the open route was. Barn 1. The shaft beneath Eli's floorboards. The mountain was not trying to keep people in anymore. It was trying to sort them. Another operator reached the doorway outside. Brutus launched, but the bad leg finally betrayed him. He hit low, missed the full body, and took a rifle but across the ribs hard enough to spin him sideways. "Brutus!" The dog slammed into the post, found his feet again, and still put himself back between the door and Eli. That did something final inside him. Eli grabbed the hard case, ripped out the next file by force, and flipped the waterproof sleeve open on the trough. A photo. A chart. A blood tree. 2 names circled in red. Mercer, Mara variant 8. His eyes dropped lower. Genetic source pair. Mercer, Eli Vale. Hannah. He stopped breathing. Rachel saw the page over his arm and whispered, "No!" Mara stared at the sheet with naked horror. "That's not possible." Hannah heard the silence from below and understood before Eli could speak. "What does it say?" He couldn't answer. Not because he didn't believe it. Because some part of him did. The scar. The age. The archive. The replicated face. The impossible certainty the system had shown when it named him paternal node. Mara looked from the file to Hannah below the shaft. To Eli. Back to the file. "I'm not her daughter," she said. No one corrected her. The younger girl below did. "I am," she said softly. Every head turned. The child standing under the shaft light looked up with Eli's eyes set in Hannah's face. Not a copy of Mara. A correction. A branch built closer to source. The room seemed to tilt under Eli's boots. Hannah's voice from the ladder came out as a whisper of pure shock. "Oh God!" The radio voice stayed calm. "Original branch damaged. Substitute branch matured. Continuity maintained." That sentence shattered what little control Mara had left. She crossed the barn in 3 fast steps, seized the radio from the trough, and slammed it against the wall hard enough to burst the casing open. Static screamed. She slammed it again. 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 Then threw the broken pieces into the rain. Outside, the remaining operators changed posture instantly. No more recovery caution. One raised a compact launcher. Another shouted for immediate seal. The excavator engine on the ridge beyond the pasture revved to full power. Eli understood at once. If they had lost comms and continuity inside the barn, they were going to bury the access point with everyone still in and around it. Hannah screamed from below. "They're moving the upper earth mover!" The floor under Eli's knees trembled. Mara looked at him through rain, gas, and the ruin of her own identity. "What did they make me?" Eli had no good answer, so he gave her the only useful one. "Alive! Right now, that's enough." He shoved the file into her hands, grabbed Jonah under one arm, Micah under the other, and dragged both boys behind the trough. Rachel hauled the smaller children in after them. Caleb, half paralyzed by the dart but not finished, used his last functioning hand to slam the trapdoor support wedge deeper into the warped hatch seam. "What are you doing?" Rachel shouted. He looked at Eli, not her. "Buying the ladder 10 more seconds." Then the excavator bucket hit the side wall of the barn. The whole structure jumped. Boards exploded inward. Hay, dust, and rain sheeted through the breach. Brutus went down under falling timber, with a cry Eli had never heard from him before. The shaft opening tore wider under the impact. The ladder below screamed against its mounts. Hannah lost her grip and dropped the last 6 feet back to the landing. The lower hall lights went blood red. The panel flashed one final update. Collection route failed, purge path active, and beneath that, in white so clean it felt evil, retain primary bloodline only. Then children below the shaft looked up at once. Not at Hannah, not at Rachel. At Eli. As if the system had told them which life mattered and which ones could drown. And from under fallen beam, Brutus tried to rise, and couldn't. The words on the panel burned through Eli faster than pain. Retain primary bloodline only for 1 suspended second. Every child below the shaft looked up at him, as if the system itself had spoken through their fear, and told them which life mattered. Then Brutus tried to rise under the fallen beam, and couldn't. The sound that came out of the shepherd was small, shocked, and far worse than a full cry. Eli dropped to one knee beside him at once. A split timber had pinned the dog's rear quarters to the muddy floorboards. Rain hammered through the hole the excavator bucket had torn in the barn wall. Dust and hay floated in white gas. The surviving operators outside had stopped shooting. They didn't need to. The machine above the ridge had become the real weapon now. "Brutus!" The dog's eyes found him instantly. Still clear. Still fighting. He tried to drag himself forward with his front legs and failed. His muzzle lifted toward the shaft anyway, not toward safety, not toward Eli, but toward the opening and the children below. Guarding. Still. That nearly broke Eli. Behind him, Rachel was hauling Jonah and Micah away from the widening hole, while Mara gathered the scattered files with shaking hands she did not seem to recognize as her own. Caleb, drugged half numb, had braced his shoulder under the trapdoor lip to keep the warped opening from slamming fully shut. Every muscle in his neck trembled with effort. Below, Hannah had dragged herself back to the ladder and was forcing the first of the trapped children toward the rungs, while the lower hall pulsed blood red around them. The panel tone changed. One clear bell. Then a second. Then a steady low hum. Hannah looked up and went white. "The water!" Eli turned to the shaft. At first, he saw nothing. Then a black sheet surged around the far bend of the lower corridor and struck the wall behind the first line of children. Not ankle deep. Not creeping. Floodwater. Cold and fast and full of debris, rushing in from the failed transport wing behind them. The children screamed. Hannah shoved the first boy onto the ladder. "Climb!" He froze. Of course he froze. He had been bred for obedience in a place where moving first usually meant pain. Eli snatched one of the files from Mara's arms and hurled it down the shaft. The waterproof sleeve cracked the boy across the shoulder hard enough to shock him forward into motion. He started climbing. "Again!" Hannah shouted. Another child came. Then another. The flood hit the landing and turned the lower floor slick black. The red panel updated in a flash of white. Purge and progress route secondaries teal flood hold primary access. Rachel saw it and made a sound that had no language left in it. Mara stared at the words as if reading her own skeleton. "Secondaries," she whispered. The younger girl below, the one with Hannah's face and Eli's eyes, looked up through spray in panic. "That means us." Eli felt something inside him go flat and lethal. "No," he said. The operators outside must have heard the change in his voice, because one of them shouted over the excavator engine, "Take the male alive!" Brutus heard it too. Even pinned, the dog bared his teeth and dragged forward another inch through pain, enough to put himself between the outer breach and Eli's back. That was it. No more thinking in circles. No more trying to salvage everything. Eli stood. He crossed to the trough, seized the steel chain hanging beside the old feed crank, and wrapped it around the broken excavator beam pinning Brutus. Then he looped the other end through the hand winch fixed to the center post and began cranking. The post groaned. Rachel understood first. She lunged in and took the handle on the next turn. Mara threw the files down and grabbed it with her. Caleb, still under the trapdoor, barked one hoarse order through clenched teeth. "Faster!" The chain tightened. The beam shifted a fraction. Brutus yelped, then bit the timber itself as if pain were something to dominate. The outer team chose that second to rush. 2 operators came low through the blown side wall in a clean stack, masks on, rifles tucked. Eli shot the lead man through the visor before the barrel cleared. The second fired back and took a chunk out of the center post. The whole barn jolted. Rachel lost her grip on the winch. Mara caught it and kept turning. Caleb shouted from the shaft, "I'm losing the hatch!" Eli shot the second operator through the thigh and kicked his rifle away as he fell. Outside, the excavator engine roared higher. The driver was trying to back the machine clear for another strike. The chain screamed. The beam rose 2 inches. Brutus tore himself free in a burst of mud, blood, and splintered wood, stumbled once on the bad leg, then found the line of his duty as if the body were an afterthought. He limped straight to the shaft and planted himself there. 3 children were already on the ladder now. Hannah below, waist-deep in black water. The younger girl still waiting in the red hall light because the others were smaller, and she kept shoving them ahead of her. Near resolution appeared all at once. The shaft was open enough. Brutus was alive. The children were moving. Rachel had Jonah and Micah. Mara had chosen a side. Even Caleb, half gone from the dart, still held the trapdoor angle with his own body. For one dangerous heartbeat, Eli could see a version of survival. Then the twist came. A new engine rolled up the property lane behind the excavator. Not tactical. Not recovery. County rescue. A volunteer fire truck, red strobes cutting through the rain, skidded into the yard far beyond the pasture gate. Someone local must have seen the storm damage. Called it in. The truck doors burst open and responders started running with flood lamps and trauma bags. The outer team heard it and panicked. One of the surviving operators shouted, "Burn the site!" Caleb's face went dead. Mara looked from the red truck lights to Eli and understood at the same moment. They won't leave witnesses. The operator by the excavator swung up a compact launcher. Not sedative this time. Incendiary. Eli fired first. The shot broke the man's elbow, but the launcher still discharged. The round streaked through the rain, struck the far lost support, and burst into a sheet of white fire that climbed old hay and dry wood with impossible speed. The entire upper half of the barn ignited in one breath. Rachel screamed. Micah buried his face in Jonah's shoulder. Brutus barked once into the firelight. Below the shaft, the children started crying in blind terror as burning debris began falling past the opening. The county responders were now close enough to see everything, and too far to understand any of it. Eli heard one of them yell to cut the engine and bring water, another to call sheriff, another to get back from the collapsed line. The outer team had not expected civilians. That was the twist. Now there were too many eyes, too many uncontrolled lives. And because of that, they changed priority again. The female voice came over a surviving external speaker, stripped of all softness now. Terminate the archive. Recover the primary if possible. If possible. Mara heard it and laughed once, like a wound opening. That's the whole family lesson, isn't it? The lower panel beneath the shaft flashed through the smoke and red spray. Primary route lost. Promote juvenile alternate. Eli stared down. The younger girl below had stopped helping the others climb. She was looking at the panel. Then at him. And with a calm that belonged to children who have heard too many adults deciding their worth, she said the one thing that twisted the almost resolution into something crueler. They're not keeping you anymore, she said. Her eyes shifted to Jonah. They're keeping him. The sentence hit Rachel like a knife. She pulled both boys against her at once, but Jonah twisted free enough to look down through the shaft at the younger girl in the flooded hall. For one impossible second, the two children stared at each other like mirror halves of a future no one had asked to inherit. Hannah understood before Eli did. No, she whispered, then louder, raw with terror. No, they switched the route. Caleb's head snapped toward the panel. What route? Hannah pointed through spray and smoke. The white text beneath the flashing purge alert had changed again, one line at a time, as if the system were correcting itself around living blood. Primary male node unstable transfer juvenile male first maternal host optional. Rachel went dead white. Mara stared at the words, then at Jonah, then finally at Eli with the kind of horror that only comes when the machine you were raised in stops pretending to be neutral. They were never collecting you, she said. The loft beam above them groaned in the fire. They were collecting your son. And the burning barn had just become the trap. The burning barn had just become the trap. Everyone inside it understood the same thing at once. The archive had adapted. Not Eli. Not the files. Not the exposed shaft. Jonah. The system had shifted its route under fire, flood, and interruption and decided the boy mattered most. Rachel saw it on the panel, and made a sound so raw it seemed to tear her in half. She grabbed Jonah and dragged him backward from the shaft, as if muscle alone could pull him out of a machine's decision. Below, the younger girl with Hannah's eyes looked up through red spray and falling sparks. She did not cry. She looked at Jonah the way a child looks at a door closing on the life she was told might one day be hers. They'll lock the upper lane around him, Hannah shouted from the flood. Eli, now! The loft beam cracked above them. Fire raced through old hay and dry wood faster than rain could beat it back. Brutus limped into the center aisle, barking between the doorway, the flames, and the shaft. Caleb Keller dragged himself to the hatch and wedged his shoulder under the bent lip again. Mara tore the live file from Eli's hands. There's another route, she said. Hannah looked up sharply. No, yes. It was sealed. It was sealed for branches without command priority. Mara jabbed a finger at the map hidden inside the sleeve. Juvenile overflow lift. West of the lower hall. If the primary path switched to Jonah, the overflow path should unlock for the others. Caleb coughed blood. Should? That is the best word I have. Another section of loft crashed into the aisle. Sparks exploded. Micah screamed. Rachel threw herself over both boys. Eli dragged the burning timber aside with a hay hook while smoke rolled around his knees. County rescue lights flashed across the broken wall outside. Voices shouted for water and sheriff backup. The civilians were close now, close enough to help, too uninformed to understand, and exactly the kind of witnesses the archive had never planned for. One of the outer operators raised his rifle toward the responders. Eli shot him through the chest before the barrel settled. He turned to Mara. "Can you open the overflow?" Her eyes flicked to the shaft. To Hannah. To the younger girl below. To Jonah shaking in Rachel's arms. "Yes," she said. "But not from here." She pointed into the fire. At the loft ladder. Rachel stared at her. "You want him to climb into that?" "It isn't above the fire," Mara snapped. "It's behind the relay wall. The old barn light was tied to a concealed switch box. That's why Brutus kept warning on the loft line first." Eli looked at the dog. Brutus was coughing, blood on one hind leg, fur singed at the shoulder, and still facing the loft every time the flame shifted. The shadow in the barn was not a man. It was a hidden access control concealed behind old boards and loft junk, right where the dog had first fixed his growl. The lower panel flashed again. Transfer juvenile male first lockdown ion. 049. Rachel clutched Jonah so hard he cried out, "Please!" That one word settled the rest. Eli shoved the pistol into Mara's hand. "Cover the door." He seized the hay hook, vaulted the fallen beam, and ran for the loft ladder through heat and sparks. Brutus moved with him instantly despite the bad leg. The dog reached the ladder first, barked once at the half-burned wall beside it, and planted his paws against the boards exactly where Eli would have searched anyway. Eli climbed. The old boards trembled under his weight. Smoke rolled through the rafters. He slammed the hook into the wall panel behind the hanging tack and ripped sideways. The false wall split. Behind it sat a steel relay box, painted barn brown and disguised by dust. One small biometric pad glowed under soot. Below, Mara saw it and shouted, "Blood trigger!" Eli cut his palm on a splintered nail, slapped his hand against the pad, and felt the little machine wake under blood and pressure. Nothing happened. Then the relay box clicked. Somewhere under the barn, magnetic locks boomed open in sequence. Hannah heard it and looked down the flooded corridor. "You did it!" The younger girl below heard it too. She turned toward the dark left wall as a hidden door there split open, and spilled light cut through the spray. Children in the lower hall started running toward it at once. Not Jonah. Not Hannah. The others. The overflow route had opened. Near resolution arrived in a rush. The younger children could still be saved. The branch flood could still escape. Then the final twist hit. A black line flashed on the relay screen beside Eli's hand. Primary node transfer irreversible. He stared at it. "Tell me that means something else," he shouted down. No one answered. The route for Jonah had advanced too far. The machine would not release him into the overflow path now. Rachel saw Eli's face and understood. "No!" Jonah looked between them, frightened now not by the fire or the gunshots, but by the silence adults make when truth arrives. Below, Hannah drove herself through floodwater toward the ladder. "Get him away from the shaft!" The lower wall guns came alive again, this time not sweeping the hall, aiming the ladder. Caleb saw the ports open and did the one redeeming thing a broken man can do at the end of his choices. He threw himself over the opening. Just a blood-loss stumble and a full-body collapse across the hatch rim, using his own weight to shield the children below and Jonah above. The first burst tore through him instead of the ladder. Rachel screamed his name even though she had hated him. Micah buried his face. Mara went white. Brutus howled. The dog leapt to the hatch at once, barking into the muzzle flashes with such fury that even the lower guns hesitated for a fraction. That fraction saved Hannah. She reached the bottom of the ladder. Eli dropped from the loft, hit the floor hard, grabbed Jonah under the arms, and dragged him away from the shaft. The panel screamed. Lockdown breach primary in motion. Jonah twisted in his grip, terrified. "What does that mean?" Eli looked at the boy, at the children still escaping through the overflow route below, at Hannah climbing one-handed through smoke, at Rachel on her knees, at Mara with the pistol aimed at the broken doorway, at Brutus standing over Caleb's failing body and still guarding the shaft. Then he made the last choice. He picked Jonah up and carried him not away from the shaft, but straight toward the county responders now rushing the broken wall. The outer operators saw it too late. One raised his weapon. Mara shot him through the neck. Another ran for the machine. Rachel took Eli's drop pistol and shot out the excavator's front tire, sending the whole vehicle lurching sideways into the burning wall. The barn gave up. Rafters cracked. Loft collapsed. Fire rolled across the ceiling. Eli hit the open rain with Jonah in his arms, and county responders swarming toward him in reflective coats and shouted questions. "Take the boy," he yelled. "Do not let anyone in black near him." A firefighter caught Jonah. Another grabbed Rachel and Micah. Two more moved for Hannah as she stumbled through the opening with water and smoke behind her. Mara came out last with Brutus beside her. The barn collapsed fully behind them. The shaft went with it. The corridor. The panel. The files Caleb had died to carry long enough to expose. All of it folded into a roar of sparks, black water, and falling timber that sent steam hissing into the dawn-dark rain. Then Hannah reached Jonah. Rachel reached them both. Mara stood 3 feet away, as if family were a language she remembered but no longer trusted herself to pronounce. Micah, soaked and shaking, stepped out of Rachel's grip and took Mara's hand anyway. That broke her harder than fire had. Brutus crossed the mud on his bad leg and pressed his head against Eli's thigh. Eli dropped to one knee and put both hands in the dog's wet fur. The flood lamps painted everything white. Sirens wailed farther out on the road. Hannah crouched in front of Eli, older and changed and terribly alive, and touched the dog's head with trembling fingers. "He knew." Eli looked at Brutus. The shepherd met his eyes, as if the answer had always been simple. He had growled because the shadow in the barn was not just a man in the loft. It was a hidden system waiting behind old boards, old lies, old grief. And Brutus had refused to let Eli ignore it long enough for that system to take one more child. As dawn finally broke pale over the smoking wreckage, Eli looked at Jonah, Rachel, Hannah, Mara, Micah, and the children being wrapped in blankets under rescue lights, then back down at the dog. "Good boy," Eli whispered. Because in the end, the ex-soldier had not saved them by being harder than the machine. He saved them by finally trusting the shepherd's growl before the shadow could become another grave. For the first time in 11 years, Don did not feel like surviving. It felt like getting his family back. In that dawn, it was enough.